Welcome to Diane Marie Home, where I share DIY, gardening, cooking from scratch, and creating cozy spaces on a budget in our 1800s farmhouse in upstate New York. I have been working on prepping and planting my spring garden, so today I thought I would share plants that can be put out in your garden before the risk of frost is completely over. When I first really started to get into gardening and starting all of my own seeds, I made a very common mistake and I got all of my seed packets for all of the seeds that I wanted to grow that year and I started them all at the same time indoors next to a window. So we're talking tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumber. They all got started at the same time. And the problem with this is that different seeds need different times to grow. So tomatoes, you really want to start like 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date, where squash really don't like being transplanted. So they should really kind of go right out into the garden after your last frost. But if you really want to start them ahead of time, only 2 weeks before your last frost is recommended for starting squash because they grow so fast. But then peppers take a really long time. So those need to be started anywhere from, 8 to 10 weeks. So all of these different plants take a different amount of time to grow. And so planting them all at the same time is just kind of setting yourself up for failure from the very beginning. So to be successful with growing a garden from seed, you really need to know when is the appropriate time to start each seed. The other thing that I hear a lot is people wondering if it's too late to start their garden. And this is even in, April, people wondering if it's too late. And the thing is it is too late to start certain crops from seed, like peppers. It's usually too late to start those at this point for a shorter growing season like ours in zone 5B, 6A. But to determine if you still have enough time to start plants from seeds, you can just look on the packet and look for days to maturity, and then count how many days you have until your expected first frost to tell you if you would have enough time. If not, that's totally fine. You can usually find all of the starts that you would want from a local greenhouse, but in a lot of cases, you'll realize you do still have time to grow a lot of things from seed. Today, I'm going to be talking about some plants that can be planted out in your garden before your last frost date. I started doing this because I was getting overwhelmed at the end of May, early June, trying to get all of my plants out into the garden at that perfect time. I had to wait until there was no more frost in the forecast, and then it was like all of a sudden everything had to be planted out. So I learned about plants that are cold hardy and can handle colder temperatures, so I can get those plants out in the garden earlier, so then come the end of May, early June, I'm not so overwhelmed feeling like I have to plant so much all at once. This bed that I'm working in is one of my larger raised beds, and it has become overgrown with weeds and this terrible grass. I really do love raised beds, mostly for their look, but the longer I garden, the more I move towards just in-ground gardening. So eventually I may be removing these raised beds in the back to create a larger in-ground garden behind my greenhouse area, but that is not a project for this year. So I'm just working with what I have here and doing my best to get as many of the weeds out of this bed as I can and get it ready for some of my cold weather crops. Just as a reminder, I always have a related blog post to go along with every video, so if you're like me and like to go back and reference written notes, you can do that, and the link for the blog post will be in the description of this video. So the very first seeds that I start every year, it's my favorite thing to do after Christmas, it usually happens like right after New Year, is planting onion seeds. Onion seeds take a long time to grow, and they don't really need a whole lot of space to grow, so it's the perfect thing to get started early. And usually after the holidays, I am just ready to start some seeds and feel like spring is close, even though it's really not. I think a lot of people get discouraged by trying to grow onions in their garden because they either put onion seeds directly in their garden around May, and what happens then is the onions just don't have enough time to mature, so you're not going to get anything substantial from those seeds. Or they buy onion sets that are commonly sold at garden centers, and onions are biennials, so when you buy the onions, the dried onion sets, those are technically in their second year of growth. So when you plant those, the plant just wants to go to seed because it's already gone through its first year, it's in its second year, and it wants to produce seed. So you're not going to get nice big bulbs from the dried onion sets. The trick to having a great onion harvest is to start them from seed inside very early. Most onion packets will say to start them 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost date. However, I start mine 4 to 5 months before my last frost date and find that they do really well. It gives them extra time to grow indoors. I plant them very densely in containers. If you're using a cell pack, you can plant anywhere from, 8 to 15 seeds per cell pack instead of just 1 or 2, and they will do totally fine. When you go to plant them out, you just separate the roots, they come apart easily, and then you give them more space once you plant them out into your garden. Once the seedlings grow to be 2 or 3 inches high, you do want to keep the tops trimmed down so that they don't get too tall. You just keep trimming them down to keep them at about 2 to 3 inches until it's time to plant them out, which is about 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost. But you want to keep an eye on your forecast because the tender seedlings will just rot if they're frozen solid. Another plant that I put in my garden super early are snap peas. It's become a tradition for me to plant these out in my garden right around St. Patrick's Day. But snap peas can be planted as soon as the soil is workable. And what I found works best is to plant snap peas in a trench very, very densely, so the seeds are all almost touching each other. Here you can see the starts that I picked up from our local greenhouse. The plants I started from seed just didn't do well. They're too small, so I decided to pick up some starts at the greenhouse, and I have kale, cabbage, and broccoli here. So these are all plants that can go out before your last frost. You can see when I took them out, they were very root bound, but that's okay. I just very gently hold on to the stems of the plants and wiggle them apart to separate them and then plant them into the garden. If you were to plant them root bound like that, they would have a harder time growing. So just teasing out the roots help them to get established in the garden quicker. To go into some more specifics about these plants that I'm putting in this bed, kale is one that can go out about 6 weeks before the last frost. I'm actually a little behind on these because we're 2 to 4 weeks out from our last frost, but better late than never. I was really waiting for my seedlings to take off, which they didn't, so hopefully these transplants give me a little bit more of a head start since they are going out a little bit later. The other thing that I planted quite a bit of was cabbage, and that can be started from seed about 12 weeks before your last frost date indoors and then planted out into the garden about 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost. The other thing that I grew in here was broccoli, and this is another one that should be started about 12 weeks before your last frost date indoors from seed, but that can be planted out about 4 weeks before your last frost date. So broccoli, even though it is a cold, hardy plant, the seedlings are more tender to cold, so just keep an eye on your forecast after you plant those out. If you ever plant out these cold, hardy plants and then there's a change in the weather and it's going to get very, very cold, you can always go out and cover them with towels or sheets or anything to just help protect them against the harsh frost hitting them. Take the sheets or blankets or cardboard boxes, whatever you have, just take it off the next morning, and most of the time the plants will be completely fine. I even do this trick sometimes in the fall if we get an early frost or if there's only one frost in the forecast and I want to try to extend my garden just a little bit longer. I'll go out and try to cover at least some of my favorite plants or some of the ones that are extra sensitive to cold and were just about to harvest or still had another good harvest in them, and usually that works pretty well. Getting back to plants that can be planted out before your last frost, radish seeds are one that can go right into the garden very early on. I actually tend to throw a few of these in when I plant my snap peas around St. Patrick's Day, and they do well almost always. I sow them heavily to account for lower germination rates just because it is so cold and the temperature fluctuates a lot. When you plant seeds out, I have to mention this, when you plant them out early, even though they can survive in like the colder weather, they usually don't grow as quickly as the seed packet says. So most radishes will mature in 20 to 30 days. They're super quick crop, but when you plant them out early, they're going to take longer. So for example, this year, the ones that I put out in mid-March still are not ready to eat yet. They're probably mid-growth cycle. So I'll definitely get an earlier crop than if I waited until after my last frost date, but they're going to take longer than when I grow them later in the season. Since radishes do mature so quickly, I like to plant little batches of them throughout my garden every 2 to 3 weeks. So then I have a continual harvest of radishes instead of growing all of the radishes that I want for the season all at once and then have them all mature at the same time and be overwhelmed with radishes and not know what to do with them. Also, a side note is if you don't think you like radishes, I was there with you, but then when I found out how quickly they grew, I had to give them a try, and I roasted them. I just coated them with some olive oil and spices and put them in the oven, and they are so good that way, really easy to make. Definitely give them a try because now not only are they fun to grow because they grow so fast, but I actually like to eat them too, which is always a bonus. Spinach is another plant that can be direct seeded into the garden about 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost. Spinach likes the cooler temperatures, and it actually tastes a lot better when it's grown and harvested in cooler temperatures. Spinach tends to bolt when it gets hot out, and so it's best grown in the spring or fall. Lettuce is another one a lot like spinach. It prefers the cooler temperatures, and it tastes a lot sweeter when it's grown and harvested in cooler temperatures. It will bolt once it gets hot, and the leaves will become bitter. So lettuce can be direct seeded in the spring or the fall for a fall harvest, or lettuce can be started indoors and then planted out to give you a little bit of a jump start on germination, because I do find that although lettuce likes to grow in cooler weathers, starting the seeds on a heat mat does speed up germination in my experience. Carrots can also be started out in the garden, direct seeded in the garden in the spring, and this is actually when they should be started because carrot seeds are another one that get a bad rep because they can be kind of tricky to germinate. Carrot seeds need consistent moisture for germination, and the springtime is ideal for this. In the summer, it's just harder to get them started because the surface of the soil dries out so quickly. So in the spring, you can just sprinkle your carrot seeds out, and if you would like to help retain the moisture in the soil and increase germination, you can always cover them with a piece of burlap or a wood board or a piece of cardboard until those seeds start to germinate. And once you see them germinating, just take that cover off and you're good to go. Potatoes are another one that I plant out earlier in the season. To plant potatoes, you need potato seeds, which are just potatoes that have been grown specifically for seed and are disease tested and are not sprayed with anything that inhibits the potato's growth. To grow potatoes successfully, it's a good idea to trench them. And what this means is you just dig a big trench and put your potato seeds down about 8 to 10 inches apart, and then cover them with about 2 to 3 inches of soil and just leave them like that until you start to see them grow. And then once the potato sprouts get to be about 3 to 4 inches tall, you can put in some more of that soil that was trenched out and cover them so that just the top of the leaves are showing, and then wait for them to grow up again. And once they get maybe 4 or 6 inches tall, you do the same thing until you're back at soil level and it's all even. And then once they grow up again, you can use straw and heavily mulch them around the plants, and they'll think this is soil. And every time you do this, it's going to tell the plant to send out more roots, which means more potatoes and a bigger harvest. Once you start to see blossoms on your potato plants, you want to stop hilling them, because this means that they are starting to mature, and hilling them won't be beneficial for your plants anymore. You want them to send all of their energy into the potatoes that they've already created at that point. So those are all of the vegetables that I am getting started in my spring garden. But there are also some herbs that you can start early as well, and these are cilantro and dill. So cilantro especially likes the cold weather and can be direct sowed into the garden up to 4 weeks before the last frost date. However, since they do prefer the cooler weather, they tend to bolt once it gets warm, which is a bummer because I don't know about you, but pretty much the only thing I use cilantro in is salsa. And during the time that I have peppers and tomatoes, my cilantro is not growing. So when I grow cilantro in the cooler weather, it's important to harvest it and preserve it so that I have that to use in my recipes when I am ready to make my salsa. Some years I try to plant another batch of cilantro so that it's ready at the same time, but it's always hit or miss. It just doesn't really like to germinate in the warmer weather, so you never really know. So this early crop of cilantro is always a good idea, and then if you can get more later on, it's just a bonus. But dill is the other herb that likes cooler weather, and this is another one that I plant every, 3 or 4 weeks maybe, because I want to make sure that I have a lot of fresh dill available for when it's time to make pickles. And I also like to dry dill and keep it for making homemade ranch. I hope this video is helpful if you are really interested in gardening but don't know where to start, or you're like me and was feeling very overwhelmed by the idea of planning everything out at the same time. Hopefully this helps to spread out the workload a little bit and make it seem a little bit more manageable. If you are wanting to start gardening this year and feeling like you're already behind or it's too late, just remember you can always buy transplants, and that's okay to do. But my biggest piece of advice is to just start. Don't put it off until next year because you think that this year it's already too late or you don't have a growing space. Just start. And if you want to build a raised bed, start building it, because worst case scenario, it's not ready until middle of summer or even the end of the season. There's still a lot of plants that you can grow. Zucchini is super quick and produces zucchini really early. So, if you had it finished by midsummer, you could still grow a lot of zucchini, probably some cucumbers. There are a lot of tomato varieties that mature very quickly. So there's still a lot that you can grow even if it's delayed this season. And then the best part about that is it will be ready to go at the very start of next season for you to fully take advantage of. Where if you put it off and don't do it because you feel like you're behind this year, the chances of having it done and ready for the start of next season it's probably not going to happen. So a lot of times when I'm making new garden spaces, I'm hoping that I can get a little bit in that year, but in reality, it's not until the following year that I'm really able to take full advantage of that space. And another little tip that I was just reminded of from this footage was to make sure you plant flowers with your vegetables. Here, I grabbed some borage plants that came up. They reseed themselves every year, and I don't really do a whole lot with my borage. You can make a tea. It kind of has a cucumber flavor to it, but it has so many blossoms and the pollinators love it. So I always let the volunteer plants grow, and I'm going to put some of those in this garden just to help increase the pollination, because the more flowers you have, the more pollinators you'll get to your garden, and the more pollinators means your vegetable plants will be better pollinated, which means that your plants will produce a lot more food. Let me know in the comments what plant you are most excited to grow this year. Last year, our chickens ate all of my tomatoes, so this year I am especially looking forward to our tomato harvest, which is a ways off, but that is what I'm looking forward to. Thanks for hanging out with me today in my garden, and I'll see you in the next video.